Let me just give you a little bit of an introduction to Mr. Medrano. As he mentioned in the film, he's a food writer, but also a chef and a filmmaker. And his specialty is in indigenous foods of Texas and in the Americas. His book, Truly Texas Mexican, A Native Culinary Heritage and Recipes, published by Texas Tech University Press, received the finalist Book of the Year award from Forward Reviews. And in his most recent history and cookbook, Don't Count the Tortillas, The Art of Texas Mexican Cooking, he documents this comida cosera, home cooking of Mexican-American families. And I think all that inspired what you just watched, which was released in 2021, the food documentary Truly Texas. He has spent 23 years working throughout Latin America, Europe, and Asia, and where he came to recognize the cultural importance of native foods. So I'm going to ask you a lot about this, and you could perhaps elaborate on your biography. I wanted to ask you, Adan, about what brought you towards food journalism. You know, when you were 23 years ago, before you started your career or plus, you saw this youth panel today, right? And you see the fire and spirit in these young kids' eyes. I want you to start then, and tell us how kind of that journey brought you to now, in a condensed version.
I'll be condensed. First of all, thank you for watching the film. I greatly appreciate it. I think for me, it's an honor to have you watch it and react to it. I'm very anxious to hear your questions and comments about it. I'm surprised that you stayed through it because it's a long film. It's a theatrical release. It's been shown on theaters. Half of the information that's in the film you couldn't see because the room was so bright. So I urge you, first of all, grateful that you're showing it. We get a chance to see it. Use that as a first step. I urge you to watch it on Amazon. Amazon Prime picked up the film for distribution. It's an independent production. And so you can watch it on Amazon Prime, if you remember, on your big screen, and you'll see the photography. It's an award-winning feature film photographer from Uruguay, Gabriel Bendahan. And the character that is missing because of the bright lights is the food and the earth, the grass, the trees, the sound. This is a character in the film that really comes through. And I think we should be very proud that the cactus, the mesquite, all of these things that we grew up with are within us, and they come out in the film if we were to see it again. I'm so grateful that you did show it. This is a wonderful first time. My food experience begins when I'm 5 years old. I remember my mother leaning over and giving me a tortilla, freshly ground masa with tortilla. She sprinkled water on it, a little bit like fairy dust. She rolls it, un machito, do you know it? And she gives it to me. I taste it. It's a cold winter day. And the aroma of the corn, the roasting flavor of the corn, as opposed to the sweetness inside the moist machito, is a very complex experience for me of flavor and taste. And then my mom leaning over and offering it, the Mother Earth feeding the child. This is what food is. Food is relationship and context and memory. And those are my experiences of food. That's how I started. I fell in love with food. I've been cooking all of my life. And it was after I finished, my first career was as a filmmaker. I started the Chicano Film Festival in 1976, the first time that Latinos were able to show our films. Then I did philanthropy. But it's a long answer to your question, so I'll say after 23 years, I did return to food. I've been doing it now for, 13 years. And I'm combining my filmmaking and others with it. But it's the voices. I urge you to watch it again, if you will. I'm surprised that you stayed with it. I really appreciate it.
I think we all enjoyed the film. I mean, you hear, chuckles and laughs. There's a little bit of comedy, a little bit of drama, a lot of love there. And for me, the take-home message was about connection, right? I heard the word several times, you're connected to family, you're connected to the earth, you're connected to tradition. And just kind of thinking about our discussions that we've had throughout the day. And that youth panel I know you mentioned was just so inspirational, provocative. One of the seventh graders said, these days the one thing that we're connected to is our phones, right? And you heard him say, oh, my sister, she's the worst. She's always on her phone all the time, but she's in middle school, so that's normal, right? And so it's interesting. And then of course you heard your I think it's your niece who was saying, oh no, I'm not going to Google it because I'm going to use other forms of connection to figure out how to do this on my own. And so, I wanted to ask you, with this kind of rapidly changing world, and in fact, I might argue to say that there is less attention. I mean, there's more opportunities for digital connection than there is for the old kind of traditional forms of connection. How do you think, for those of us who have a relationship with food, how do we adjust, or should we adjust, there's a focus on plant-based diets these days because we have a growing awareness of the importance of the implications of meat as it's traditionally produced right now, which is a lot of factory farms. So I'm just curious if you've ever talked about that or thought about that, and what those thoughts were.
Thoughts regards to digital media and to beef?
Well, or just like this idea of how do we adjust to like kind of these contemporary realities?
The climate change is an existential threat, whether we live here or in New York City. My next book, which is almost finished, and the follow-up to this film is a 6-part television series, which will be either Netflix or Amazon again. And it's the plant-based traditions of South Texas and northeastern Mexico. Because if you look back at how we ate 10,000 years ago, and even 5 years ago, when I was growing up, some years ago, I won't tell you exactly how many, we rarely ate meat. We had arroz, frijoles, verdolaga, spinach, eggplant, much of that chiles, of course, and we had meat once in a while. And we were very healthy. And so this next book, the working title is the Texas Mexican Plant-Based Cookbook. And all the recipes will be plant-based. And I'm, thank you. And I'm sure delicious because they're going to recreate and reclaim what our ancestors cooked from this land, mezquites and all of these things. I believe that digital media, I return to film because film is, if we treat film as a sensual experience, paying attention to the visuals and to the light and to the sound so that it's really an immersive experience, it's very similar to the immersive experience of our carbon-based bodies. And I think digital media can be integrated very well into the gardening that the students were talking about. I believe that taking pictures can be a good thing. I believe that the ability to storytell in new ways can be very powerful depending on the story and depending on if we go to those spaces in our memory that are painful. The story of our food is not the, as some writers say, the beautiful marriage between the European ingredients coming in and being married to the indigenous techniques and ingredients. And it was a wonderful marriage. And look at the beautiful food we have now with arroz con pollo and pork with chiles and all that. It really wasn't that. We were deprived of our lands. We were deprived of our traditional source to food. And the traditional bison, nopalitos, deer, rabbits, squirrels, turtles were no longer available to us because we had been driven from our lands. And so we had to contend in the 16th century, and this is in the books, in the history books by Spanish people. They were thankfully very good at writing things down, so we can be thankful to them for doing that. We know how many cow heads arrived. We know how many head of sheep different Spanish expeditions brought. So in the 1600s is when all of this begins to happen here. And our culinary ancestors no longer had our own recipes and ingredients. We had to contend with new things. And so it was out of this suffering and deprivation that women and two-spirit people, this is the people who did it, men did not do it. Women are the engineers of our cooking technologies and the creators of the flavor profiles. Comino, black pepper, Yahoo. This trinity is a creation of Mexican-American women. They created that flavor profile simply because it's delicious. So out of deprivation and suffering, we took what we had to cook with, which is these new things, either that or die, and we made beautiful things out of it. So dig deep down in a digital media and be a storyteller about that. Because I always say I don't speak now in my native language, which was Coahuiltecan. I speak in Spanish, which is the language of conquest. I call my father Apa, not Papa, which is the Spanish one. In those intimate settings, we keep our indigenous words. Most of them are lost. But I speak Spanish, which is a language of conquest, and English, which is a language of conquest, from a position of native knowing, and that's what counts. So I think we can take virtual beings and the storytellers that we are, make those our stories. Dig deep down and make sure that what we're saying and what we're doing really rings true, not just to our immediate experience, but to that of our ancestors, because we are the ones who put it forward. Now, if that isn't the longest answer to a quick question, I don't know what is. I think we need to...
Yeah, we'll probably see if we have, some questions in the audience. And as they pass the mic around, we're going to come to Mackenzie in a bit. But I want to ask you one last thing. On the film, one of your characters said that peace and justice starts with ourselves, right? Now, you've been participating in the Food Summit this far, and yesterday you saw another film, a very provocative film about the history of farm workers in Texas. And there, the similar story, a lot about the power of women and the strength of women to carry the kind of the voices of the peoples. How do you think that the film yesterday and your film, how do they resonate? And I want to ask you from that position of peace and justice, because there's a lot of folks involved in our food system that don't have either. And, and even when they start with themselves, like we saw with the organizing of farm workers in their history, there's still a lot of work left, right? So where do we start if we were trying to think about everyone who needs help, right? I mean, the theme for this conference is around equity in food systems and justice in food systems. So where do we start if we start with ourselves?
That's a very personal response, I think. Each of us to decide where is our storytelling capacity. If my ámbito is my children, that's it. I tell stories to my children. Do what it is that is here. Little by little, the world is changed by good deeds and by the memory of those who have come before us. The memory of those who have come before us always asks the question, what is your ethical system? And I think if we, more and more of us, tell each other about the importance of each of us being a storyteller, then we ask ourselves, what is the story that I want to tell, and to whom and how? And if it's this is a story. A story is my mother giving me a tortilla the way she did. That's storytelling. Every time we cook and eat, we narrate our identity. That is a true narration. If you ask a cook, I hope I'm answering your question about this story. If you ask a cook, una señora, many of you, or how much salt, cuánto le pongo al pozole, they're going to say, pues el tanteo, tanteale. It's a different language. Cooks have a different language. I'm inviting 10 chefs to Houston for an Encuentro Summit. They're all comida casera cooks and writers, food writers, by invitation. And I think the problem with food writers is they ask a question of a cook and they say, is this Tex-Mex or is it Texas Mexican? And is this part of the tradition of the American or is it the Spanish? And if the writers would be prepared and eat the food with intention and with intellectual attention, they would really understand that a cook, I'm going to tell you the answer by cooking the food where it tastes exactly the way I think it should taste with our community and the way my grandmother, eat it, and then there's your answer. I'm not a writer, I am not a philosopher, but I am a cook, and I'm narrating to you my identity with what I cook. So that's one way. I think each of us can ask ourselves what we do. Each one is individual, but collectively, if we believe in these little things, that in my view, that's what I believe in. Each of us changing little by little. And I think ultimately it's about making beautiful food. Our food is beautiful food. The more people make beautiful food, properly sourced, those who cooked it and who picked it are paid fair wages. We're doing beauty. All these artistic cooks who say, I can do anything I want. No, you can't do anything you want. Can you have beauty without justice? That's the question. And I think if we all cook beautiful food in that way, beauty with justice, the world will be more beautiful.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was an awesome film. My question today, we heard a lot about procurement when we heard from people who focus on purchasing school food. And it seems because price is the number one goal is trying to get food as cheap as possible, it seems that it's very difficult to source locally. It's even more difficult for them to source organic. There was not even talk about purchasing from indigenous growers. That was not even part of the conversation. So I'm curious for you if you've seen in Texas, hospitals, schools, other places have an interest in sourcing from indigenous growers, and also if price is sort of the number one priority, like how can we ever get there in a meaningful way to source a lot of our food from indigenous growers, and without just the only focus being on the easiest possible way to source the mass quantity of food?
Thank you. That's a structural, very complex question. You had a whole panel on that, of course. From where I come from as a writer, artist, chef, I know that there is a growing number of chefs and restaurateurs. All the chefs that I'm bringing to Houston, 10 invitees, all care about this. They all have, to some degree, sourcing from indigenous suppliers when they can do it. And this, I think, will grow. Last year I was a James Beard Award judge, and we had to go to all these restaurants, and we had a great number of women who were nominated. I nominated quite a few from the Valley. And there is this sense that justice is creeping in. We have to be very faithful to continue saying that over and over again. But there is a growing, I can attest that in the James Beard Award nominee process for restaurants, there is a growing awareness that this is necessary.
Any other questions from the audience while we have it on?
Cualquier pregunta, no sé.
I just have a simple question. It's not as profound as Mackenzie's here, but what made you want to tell this story? I know you alluded to it in the film, but I mean, can you expand on that? I think it's an important story to tell. It's one that not many people tell, and I love hearing it because I'm also a mestizo, indigenous background or indigenous heritage, but also Southern European. So, and this is a side that doesn't get told much. So how did you find the courage, if you will, to tell this story, since not many people are telling it out loud, at least?
And more should. I hope this will be the first of others. As I say, we're doing a follow-up to this. You have to be yourself, and this is something that needed to be told, and there's other stuff that needs to be told. We're just getting started. I think Antonia Castañeda from San Antonio. She's a brilliant writer, and I quote her in my book. She says, "Have the confidence to claim your experience and that of your community." Start there, and that's what I did. And everything I say in the film, like cuisine divorced from culture has no legs. I'm simply reporting what I see in my community. I see that. When we cook and all the cultura is there, most of the cooks will say, "Lo hice con mucho amor." They always say that. And that's what makes it brilliant. I see that, and that's what I say. And have the confidence to claim your own experience and that of your community. We are not to be categorized according to categories from those outside of us. As the man said, Hispanic, Herpanic, Pan-American, we have to claim ourselves who we are. And I think more and more of us can do that. I think what you're doing at this center and by having this summit is enormously important. It's the same thing that I'm doing with the film. You're bringing in these voices, all these panels of Mexican-American voices of all types, young, male, women, and they're all speaking their aspirations and how they're moving forward. That's storytelling. This is another way that you're doing it.
Thank you.
I hope that you can bring your 10 chefs to the valley too. Please. I met an MD anthropologist in Mexico years ago, Luis Vargas, and he was inviting on a regional basis all around the country in Mexico, chefs to come together, just, home chefs, bring their favorite recipes, and they were doing it. I don't know if we're allowed to do this in the United States with the way legislation works and everything, but it was fabulous. I mean, people would bring their recipes, they'd trade them, they'd taste them, it was just like a celebration of regional and familial differences that was phenomenal.
I'll take that as a formal invitation. I think it's very necessary to do that.
Let's paint a picture. And my question, I don't mean it to be answered now, but for you and a lot of us to think about it. If you had the ideal small garden in a school setting that could culminate at the end of a semester with the children harvesting the food, the crops that they had grown, and watching a dish be prepared for them, that they would eat this fresh, healthy food, having watched it made by an adult, seen that loving process that took place, and had a memory set in their mind that they could carry on. What would that garden setting look like? And again, I don't really want you to answer that right now, but I think that's a very powerful picture that we could bring to reality in a lot of schools. And I don't know if you had, I know you said you went, or in Berkeley, if you were with Alice Waters, but that whole concept of bringing gardens to school and then getting the kids integrated into the culinary components of it and the traditions and the richness that comes from that.
I'm glad you mentioned both gardens and Alice Waters. What Alice Waters wrote about and made famous and with her restaurant is what hundreds and thousands of Mexican-American poor women who are farm workers and did not have toilets and had to go out into the fields were doing. Many of them, they were growing their own food because they had to, and those who did not grow them foraged. My mother, I'm a farmer from a migrant farm working family, and we had no toilets when we were out there. If I told you this, well, because we were told yesterday, but these women grew or foraged. Because I remember following my mother. I was so high, and she would go and she would be chopping quelitre, the amaranth, so that she could cook it. And so Waters made it famous and broad for the Anglo, for the large, but our women taught us by doing that the tide to the earth, we belong to the earth, all this is natural. We do it. And when the women said, I've got to cook this quelitre because that's all we have to eat. I want to feed you to survive. She didn't stop there. She said, it's not that we survive, it's how we survive. We survive with beauty. We survive with joy, and this is what cooking brought to us. So this is the dimension that Alice Waters misses, this care for beauty and for caring that comes out of a place of want and need. And I think that's miraculous and very special. And we have the women of the Mexican-American poor community to thank for that.
Well, we are right at time's end. We have one. Well, how about we got one last question from Cruz back there?
I'm 65 years old, and your movie brought out a 58-year-old good memory. As migrant farm workers, we used to go to Greeley, Colorado, and that's where one of the biggest matanzas are. So our parents used to go and get the cabezas. And on Sunday, that's what we used to cook as a family get together and so forth, so on. And it's just something that you say some of those good memories are stored away. Well, you just woke one up. Your film did. Thank you.
You know, I just like to thank you, Adon, for joining us, for not just and sharing with us not just your work, but your vision and your wisdom and your participation. One of the things that was said in the film by one of your co-stars was that sometimes people aren't well trained to listen, and I think there is a lot of room for this kind of education and for educators in this room. We have to learn to listen, as well as encourage others to listen. And what does that mean? It doesn't mean to just tell what we think, but to listen to what others think, what our elders have to say, what the earth is telling us, and that's an important quality that I have to tell you I really appreciated from your film, is just really imparting the importance of listening. And the guy said, the voice continues. Once you say it, it doesn't end there. And to me, like when we heard from all the panelists today, you can see that same message from the elders that presented yesterday to the young 7th grader that was on stage today. It's that same sense of urgency and connection that you shared here. So thank you once again. I'd like to just invite everybody to come back tomorrow, because Adon is going to give us a cooking demo right here on stage, and he give a lecture about some of the Native American foods of our region. And as a special treat, we have some students from South Texas College, a colleague of Adon, and she and her culinary arts students will also do their interpretation of Adon's recipe from his book. And they will, once you smell all of the aromas and experience the tantalizing preview of Adon's demonstration, we'll open the doors and everyone can enjoy a portion by some of these young aspiring chefs.
It'll be enchiladas. I'm going to cook enchiladas the way that I will guide you, and we'll see. Enchiladas narrate the Native American roots of Texas Mexican food, and we're going to add sunchokes, sunflower, el camote del girasol, which is an ancient plant from this side. We're going to add those to it. Thank you.
Okay, so that means you come back tomorrow, right? So we have just thank you for those on the live stream. We'll be back here tomorrow at 8:45.
Yeah, sessions start at 9, I believe. I could be wrong. 8:45.
8:45?
9. Yeah.
Tomorrow we're going to have with us Jim Hightower, who is joining us to give an address. And then we're going to have some more provocative panels before we're going to build up your appetite until Adon's closing in the afternoon. So thank you once again for everyone, and to Adon as well.